This presentation explores ancient religious practices and beliefs which some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. It is the perfect predator, an armored biological machine that has remained virtually unchanged for 8 million years. It is a living fossil, a relic from a time when monsters ruled the earth. The Nile crocodile. It can grow up to 20 feet long, weigh as much as a small car, and its bite force is the strongest of any animal alive today, capable of snapping bone like a dry twig. It is a patient, silent hunter. It can hold its breath for over an hour, waiting just beneath the surface of the water, its eyes and nostrils the only trace of the death machine lurking below. For the people of ancient Egypt, this was not a creature you watched on a nature documentary. This was the monster in their backyard. The Nile River was their lifeblood, their source of water, food, and transportation. But every time they approached its banks, every time a child went to fetch water or a fisherman cast his net, they knew the monster was there, watching, waiting. It was a daily, visceral terror, a constant threat that could erupt from the murky depths in a terrifying explosion of teeth and fury, dragging its victims down to a watery grave. So what did the ancient Egyptians do about this apex predator, this embodiment of sudden, violent death? They didn't just try to kill it. They didn't just fear it. They got down on their knees, and they worshipped it. They saw in that terrifying grin not just a predator but a god. They named him Sobek, the crocodile god of the Nile. And this was no minor spirit of the riverbank. Sobek was a god of creation, a symbol of pharaoh-like power, and a deity of shocking, untamable virility. They built entire cities in his honor, most famously a place the Greeks would later call Crocodilopolis, the city of the crocodile. Here priests maintained a sacred lake where they kept a single massive crocodile. They called him Petsuchos, meaning he who belongs to Sobek. They adorned him with gold and jewels, pierced his ears with earrings of glass and precious metal, and fed him sacrificial meat and cakes soaked in honey. When he died, they didn't discard him. They mummified him with the same care and reverence they would a pharaoh, and buried him in a special tomb, already preparing to select his next living incarnation. This raises a terrifying and profound question that historians have wrestled with for centuries. Why? Why would a civilization worship the very creature that hunted them? Why elevate the monster that devours your children to the status of a divine being, clothing it in gold and treating it like a king? The answer is far more complex and disturbing than simple fear. It's a secret buried in the Egyptian understanding of power, violence, and creation itself. And the bizarre rituals performed at Crocodilopolis were just the beginning. What they were truly trying to achieve, the dark pact they were trying to make with this reptilian god, is a mystery that pulls us deep into the heart of the ancient world's most successful, and perhaps most brutal civilization. To understand Sobek, you must first understand the Nile. To the Egyptians, the river wasn't just water. It was a god in its own right, happy. And like any god, it had two faces. Each year, the Nile would flood its banks, depositing a thick, black, incredibly fertile silt that made civilization possible in the middle of a vast desert. This was the gift of the gods, the miracle that sustained an empire for 3,000 years. But the Nile could also be a killer. It could flood too much, wiping out villages, or too little, bringing famine and starvation. And lurking within its waters was its most fearsome agent, the crocodile. The crocodile was the Nile's enforcer, the raw, physical manifestation of the river's unpredictable power. When a crocodile seized a wildebeest from the riverbank, it wasn't just an act of nature. It was a display of divine, absolute authority. The Egyptians believed that by worshipping Sobek, they weren't just appeasing a dangerous animal. They were negotiating with the very forces of nature that governed their existence. They were trying to harness that terrifying primal power for themselves. This duality is encoded into Sobek's very image. He is most often depicted as a man with the head of a crocodile, or sometimes as a crocodile itself, wearing a crown of ram horns, a sun disk, and towering plumes. The man's body represents civilization, order, and intellect. The crocodile's head represents brute strength, primal instinct, and untamable nature. Sobek is the bridge between these two worlds. He is the controlled chaos, the civilized monster. He embodies the pharaoh's own power, the ability to be both a nurturing protector of his people and a ferocious warrior who devours his enemies. In some texts, the pharaoh himself is called the living Sobek, a testament to the god's immense political and military significance. Worshipping Sobek was a way of acknowledging a fundamental truth of their world, that creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin. Life, in its most abundant form, often emerges from the most violent of places. The fertile mud of the Nile was born from a chaotic flood, and new life was constantly threatened by the jaws of the crocodile that lived within it. Sobek was the god who stood at that terrifying intersection. His cult is one of the oldest in Egypt, with its roots stretching back to the very dawn of the pharaonic age, over 5,000 years ago. But its heartland was a specific, marshy region of Egypt known as the Fayum Oasis. This massive, lush depression, fed by a channel of the Nile, was a paradise for crocodiles. They were everywhere. The Fayum was, in essence, Sobek's kingdom on earth. It was here, in his capital city of Shidet, the future Crocodilopolis, that his worship reached its zenith. The priests of Sobek became a powerful and wealthy class, their influence spreading far beyond the Fayum. They developed complex theologies that wove Sobek into the very fabric of Egyptian cosmology. He wasn't just some local river deity. He was a creator god. Some myths claim that the world itself was hatched from an egg laid by Sobek on a primeval mound that rose from the dark, chaotic waters of Nun, the primordial ocean. In this telling, Sobek's sweat became the rivers and seas. He was the source of all water, the source of all life. His divine family tree further cemented his importance. He was often called the son of Neith, one of the most ancient and formidable goddesses in the entire pantheon. Neith was a goddess of war, hunting, and creation, a fierce protector of the cosmos. By making Sobek her son, the Egyptians were stating that his ferocious, predatory nature was inherited from a divine, cosmic warrior. This lineage gave him legitimacy and power, connecting him to the earliest moments of creation. But perhaps the most significant evolution in Sobek's identity was his fusion with the two most powerful gods in Egypt, the sun god Ra and the king of the gods Horus. As Sobek Ra, he was not just the power of the Nile but the power of the sun itself. The crocodile, which basks on the riverbank absorbing the sun's heat, became a symbol of solar energy. This composite god represented the life-giving force of the sun combined with the fertile power of the water, the two essential ingredients for life in Egypt. His connection to Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship, was even more personal. In the central myth of Osiris, after the god of the underworld is murdered and dismembered by his brother Set, it is Sobek who is said to have helped retrieve the scattered pieces of Osiris's body from the Nile. In another version, he rescues the four sons of Horus, who represent the canopic jars used in mummification, from the water on his back. In these stories, Sobek is not a mindless destroyer. He is a protector, a savior, using his power over the water to restore divine order. He becomes an essential ally to the rightful king, Horus, and a force for cosmic stability. This crocodile god, born from the terror of the riverbank, had clawed his way to the very top of the divine hierarchy. He was a creator, a kingmaker, and a solar deity. But this elevated status only deepens the central mystery. Why go to the extreme of capturing a live, multi-ton predator and worshipping it as a living idol? What did the priests believe they were gaining from this incredibly dangerous practice? The theological texts give us clues, but the archaeological evidence found buried beneath his sacred city tells a far stranger story. A story of a relationship between man and beast so intimate, so bizarre, it forces us to question everything we think we know about the line between God and monster. To find it, you have to travel back in time, not just centuries but millennia, to a place the Greeks called Crocodilopolis. The Egyptians knew it as Shidet. Today, it's the city of Fayum, an oasis of green nestled against the desert. But beneath the modern streets lies a city built on a foundation of obsession, a city dedicated, body and soul, to a reptilian god. For centuries, it was just a name in ancient texts, a place of legend. But in the late 1800s, two British archaeologists, Bernard Grenfell and Arthur Hunt, arrived in the Fayum region. They weren't looking for gods or monsters. They were looking for paper. Specifically, papyrus, the fragile scrolls that held the lost literature and forgotten histories of the ancient world. They began digging through the ancient rubbish heaps and cemeteries, and they found what they were looking for. Thousands of fragments of text. But they found something else. Something they were not prepared for. As their teams cleared the sand from the ruins of the great temple complex, they didn't find the golden sarcophagi of pharaohs. They didn't find the tombs of forgotten queens. They found crocodiles. Not skeletons. Not fossils. Mummies. Thousands upon thousands of them. An entire necropolis, a city of the dead, built exclusively for reptiles. Imagine their shock. They were scholars of Homer and Sophocles, and they were standing in a graveyard for prehistoric predators. The sheer scale was baffling. There were colossal beasts, 15-foot-long monsters wrapped in fine linen, their powerful jaws bound shut for eternity. And there were babies, tiny hatchlings no bigger than a man's hand, mummified with the same meticulous care. Some were wrapped simply. Others were encased in elaborate cartonnage masks, painted with divine eyes and intricate patterns. Some were even buried in their own sarcophagi, tiny stone coffins for a tiny scaly god. And then they found the ones that truly defied explanation. The ones adorned with gold. Golden coverings on their eyes. Golden bands around their snouts. Jewels embedded into their thick, scaly hides. These weren't just preserved animals. They were venerated icons. This discovery ripped a hole in our understanding of Egyptian religion. This wasn't just respect for a dangerous animal. This was something far deeper, far more personal. This was devotion on an industrial scale. And at the heart of it all was a single living creature. Within the main temple at Shedet, there was a sacred lake. And in that lake lived a crocodile. But not just any crocodile. This one was believed to be the living incarnation of Sobek himself. The Greeks called him Petsuchos, which means he who belongs to Sobek. This was not a symbol. This was not a mascot. To the people of Shedet, this specific individual crocodile was their god, walking or swimming among them, and they treated him as such. Ancient writers like the Greek historian Herodotus described the life of the Petsuchos with a sense of utter disbelief. Priests were assigned to be his personal servants. They would approach him, not with spears and nets, but with offerings. He was fed specially prepared meals, not raw meat, but roasted fish and cakes made of grain and honey. He was adorned with jewelry. Gold earrings were clipped to the flesh behind his front legs. Gem-studded bracelets were fastened around his massive ankles. His priests would spend hours coaxing him from the water, opening his terrifying jaws not in an act of aggression, but to gently pour wine down his throat. This creature, an apex predator capable of snapping a man in half, was pampered like a pharaoh. He was the city's most important resident, and its most powerful oracle. The priests of Sobek believed they could read the future in the actions of the Petsuchos. If he swam to the eastern bank of the lake, it was a good omen. If he swam to the west, it signaled misfortune. If he accepted a food offering from a visitor, their prayer would be answered. If he refused it and turned away, their plea was denied. Imagine the weight of that. The fate of a harvest, the outcome of a business deal, the health of a loved one, all decided by the whim of a crocodile. The temple wasn't just a place of worship, it was a center of divination. People would travel from all over Egypt to ask questions of the great reptile god, to bring him offerings, hoping for a favorable sign. This explains the jewels and the fine foods. But it doesn't explain the thousands upon thousands of mummies. Why create a necropolis for a god who never dies, but is simply reincarnated in a new crocodile when the old one passes? The answer is both deeply spiritual and ruthlessly commercial. The mummies were votive offerings. They were a physical manifestation of a prayer. An ancient Egyptian couldn't just light a candle. They had to go bigger. If your child was sick, or you were about to embark on a dangerous journey, you would go to the temple priests and purchase a mummified crocodile. The bigger and more elaborately decorated the mummy, the more powerful the prayer. You would then present this offering at the temple, a tribute to the great god, a plea for his favor and protection. This created a massive industry. The priests of Sobek weren't just holy men, they were entrepreneurs. And their business was crocodiles. The sheer number of mummies found, tens of thousands in Shedet and other cult centers, points to a staggering realization. They couldn't have possibly been hunting all these crocodiles from the wild. The Nile would have been emptied in a generation. No, they were breeding them. The temple complexes included crocodile nurseries. They were hatching eggs by the hundreds in the warm sand, raising the young crocodiles in controlled pools, and preparing them for their sacred destiny. They were farming their own god. It was a conveyor belt of divinity, from egg to sacred offering to mummified intercessor. Think about that for a moment. An entire infrastructure, a whole branch of the Egyptian economy, dedicated to breeding, killing, and mummifying a single species for religious purposes. It's a level of focus that is hard for the modern mind to comprehend. They had perfected the process. X-rays of these mummies reveal the different techniques. Some were simply dried in the sun and wrapped in linen. Others underwent the full, expensive process just like a human pharaoh. Their internal organs were removed. They were dried out with natron salts. Their bodies were stuffed with reeds and linen to maintain their shape. And then they were anointed with sacred oils and wrapped in hundreds of yards of bandages. They even mummified crocodile eggs and fetuses, placing them inside the wrappings of the mother. This was a relationship with nature unlike any other in human history. They took the most terrifying creature in their world, the embodiment of sudden, violent death, and they transformed it. They turned the monster in the water into a pampered king, a living oracle, and a mass-produced item for salvation. They controlled its life, they controlled its death, and they controlled its afterlife. But this level of control, this industrialization of faith, hints at a desperate need. A need to manage the unmanageable. Because for all the honey cakes and golden earrings, Sobek was still the god of the unpredictable Nile, the god of primal violence. And when the omens were bad, when the river didn't rise, or when a child was taken from the banks, a mummified offering was not always enough. This gilded system of worship, this bizarre reptile farm, was built on a foundation of fear. And when that fear boiled over, appeasing the god required a much, much darker sacrifice. Human sacrifice. It's a concept so alien, so horrifying to the modern mind, that we often relegate it to the realm of fiction. But for the desperate people living on the edge of Sobek's domain, it was a terrifyingly real possibility. The evidence is not written in giant, triumphant hieroglyphs. It's whispered in the archaeological record, in the grim findings buried near his cult centers. At the necropolis of Mummified, for instance, excavators found a series of graves. The bodies inside were not carefully mummified nobles. They were buried without ceremony, many showing signs of a violent end, their bones intermingled with those of crocodiles. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when you find such burials near the temple of a god who demands blood, coincidence begins to look a lot like a pattern. Imagine the scene. The Nile has failed. The crops are withering in the fields, the sun beating down on cracked, barren earth. The granaries are emptying, and the whispers of famine are turning into the cries of starving children. The priests declare that Sobek is angry. His hunger has not been satisfied by the usual offerings of gazelle and fowl. He demands more. He demands the ultimate price to restore balance. Who is chosen? A prisoner of war, captured in a recent skirmish? A condemned criminal, their life forfeit to the state and now to the god? Or perhaps, in the most desperate of times, it was someone from the community itself. A life for thousands. The ritual would have been a spectacle of dread and awe. A procession lit by flickering torches, the air thick with incense and the low guttural chanting of priests. They would lead the chosen one to the edge of the sacred lake, the black water perfectly still, reflecting the stars. The temple crocodiles, ancient and massive, would be waiting. They were not just animals, they were avatars of the god himself, their eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. There would be no struggle, no escape. The offering was made, a life given back to the waters from which all life came. The silence that followed would be heavier than any sound, filled with the desperate hope that the sacrifice was enough, that the god was appeased, that tomorrow the river would begin to rise. This was the terrifying, transactional nature of faith in the face of annihilation. It was the brutal calculus of survival, where the line between god and monster became terrifyingly thin. But to paint Sobek as nothing more than a bloodthirsty demon of the depths is to misunderstand ancient Egypt completely. It's to see only the teeth and miss the profound power that lay behind them. For the very same people who feared his wrath also worshipped him as a fundamental force of creation itself. This is the great paradox of Sobek, the duality that makes him one of the most fascinating gods in the entire pantheon. He wasn't just a destroyer, he was a progenitor. According to some of the oldest creation myths, before there was anything, there was the Nun, a dark, chaotic, endless ocean of primordial water. And from these waters the first land arose, a sacred mound called the Benben. Who was there in that moment of Genesis? Sobek. Some stories claim he was the first to emerge from the chaos, his reptilian form a bridge between the formless water and the solid land. In one incredible version from the Fayum, it was Sobek who laid the cosmic egg upon the mound from which the rest of the world hatched. Think about that. The god of sudden, violent death was also the god who laid the egg of creation. He was present at the universe's birth. This wasn't a later addition to soften his image. It was a core part of his identity. The Egyptians understood that the power to create and the power to destroy were not opposites. They were the same force viewed from different angles. The very water that could drown you was the same water that made life possible. Sobek was the living embodiment of that truth. This creative power was directly linked to his most obvious trait: ferocious masculine potency. The crocodile was seen as the undisputed king of the riverbank, a symbol of untamable strength and virility. It's no surprise, then, that Sobek was worshipped as a god of fertility. He was the force that made the Nile swell and overflow its banks each year, depositing the rich, black silt that was the lifeblood of Egypt. Without that flood, there was no agriculture, no food, no civilization. Every year, the entire nation watched the river, praying for the inundation. They were praying to Sobek. His coming was a promise of renewal, of life reborn from the earth. He ensured the continuation of the people, the livestock, and the kingdom itself. Amulets bearing his image were worn by men hoping to father children, channeling his primal energy. This raw power also made him a natural patron of the military and a protector of the pharaoh. The king of Egypt wasn't just a ruler. He was a warrior, the chief defender of his people against the forces of chaos. And what better symbol for that role than the apex predator of the Nile? The pharaoh's power was the crocodile's jaw. Swift, decisive, and absolute. The crocodile's thick, scaly hide was like impenetrable armor, its terrifying charge like an army sweeping across the battlefield. Pharaohs would incorporate Sobek into their royal titles, calling themselves the beloved of Sobek, to align themselves with his fearsome might. Soldiers carried his image into battle, believing the crocodile god would grant them strength and protect them from harm. He was the divine bodyguard, the celestial enforcer. When you needed to project absolute, unquestionable authority, you invoked the name of Sobek. So we are left with this incredible contradictory being: a god of chaos and creation, a monster who devours, and a father who provides. A symbol of terrifying death and potent fertility. How could he be all of these things at once? Because he was the Nile. The river was a source of endless bounty, a highway for trade, the giver of the fertile soil. But it was also a place of hidden dangers, of sudden floods that could wipe out entire villages, and home to the silent predator that could snatch a life in the blink of an eye. The Egyptians didn't see this as a flaw in their logic. They saw it as the nature of the world. Life is beautiful and brutal. Order rises from chaos. Creation is a violent act. Sobek wasn't good or evil. He was real. He was the raw, untamed power of nature, a force you could not ignore, a god you had to respect or pay the ultimate price. He was the darkness in the water and the life-giving silt, all at once. But this brutal, primordial god wouldn't remain an outcast, a force of nature kept at arm's length by the more civilized gods of the pantheon. In a shocking twist of divine politics, Sobek would forge an alliance with the most unlikely of partners, a god of light, order, and the sun itself. How did the monster from the mud become the shining champion of Ra? That story is next. To understand this alliance, you have to understand the nature of power in ancient Egypt. It wasn't just about armies and borders, it was about cosmic balance, what they called Ma'at. And Ra, the sun god, was the ultimate symbol of that divine order. He was the golden barge sailing across the sky, predictable, life-giving, and absolute. Every sunrise was a victory for order. Every sunset, a perilous journey into the underworld, the Duat, where chaos reigned. Sobek, on the other hand, was the embodiment of the unpredictable. He was the flash of teeth from the murky water, the sudden violent end. He was the raw, untamed power of nature itself. He represented everything Ra was not. So why would the king of the gods, the celestial pharaoh, ever need a creature of the swamp? The answer is simple, and it's brutally pragmatic. Because sometimes to maintain order you need a monster. Imagine you're Ra. Every single night, you have to pilot your solar boat through the darkest depths of the underworld. A place filled with horrors that would unravel creation itself. Your greatest enemy, the serpent of chaos, Apep, is always there, waiting to devour you and plunge the world into eternal darkness. You have an entourage of gods to help you, sure. But wouldn't you want the single most terrifying predator Egypt had ever known on your side? Wouldn't you want the god whose very presence screamed lethal violence, standing guard on the deck of your ship? The alliance wasn't just a partnership. It was an absorption, a divine fusion. This process, which historians call syncretism, was Egypt's theological superpower. When faced with two powerful concepts, they didn't choose one over the other. They combined them, creating something new and even more powerful. And so from the divine politics of the Middle Kingdom, a new god was born, Sobek Ra. This wasn't just a name change. It was a fundamental upgrade for both deities. For Ra, it was a shot of primal adrenaline. He was no longer just a distant, regal sun king. Now he had teeth. He had the savage, protective ferocity of the crocodile. He was the creator of the universe, but now he could also snap its enemies in half. It gave the concept of divine order a terrifying new edge. And for Sobek, this was the ultimate promotion. He was no longer just the god of a specific region, the lord of the Fayum oasis. He was now fused with the chief deity of the entire nation. His primal creative urges, that raw, fertile power of the Nile mud, were now explicitly linked to the ultimate act of creation, the rising of the sun. He wasn't just a god of the water. He was now a god of the sky. He was a creator god. Think about the sheer symbolic power of this new form. A crocodile, the apex predator of the river, crowned with the blazing sun disk and cobra of Ra. It's a walking, swimming contradiction. The darkness of the deep water crowned with the fire of the heavens. The chaos of the wild fused with the order of the cosmos. Sobek Ra was the god who could walk in both worlds. He was the master of the seen and the unseen, the light and the dark. This divine merger wasn't just a story told by priests. It was a reflection of a massive political shift happening on the ground. During the 12th dynasty of the Middle Kingdom, around 1991 to 1802 BC, the pharaohs, particularly a series of kings named Amenemhat and Senusret, were focused on unifying the country and exploiting its natural resources like never before. And the heart of this new project was Sobek's traditional homeland, the Fayum. The Fayum was a massive oasis, a huge, lush basin fed by the Nile. These pharaohs undertook enormous engineering projects to reclaim land, manage the water, and turn the Fayum into the breadbasket of Egypt. It became a center of agriculture, wealth, and royal power. The pharaohs even moved the capital of Egypt to a new city, Ichtai, located right at the entrance to the Fayum. And when you build your new capital on the doorstep of a powerful ancient god, you don't ignore him. You honor him. You elevate him. You make him part of your own divine mandate. The pharaohs of the 12th dynasty didn't just worship Sobek. They integrated him into the very fabric of their rule. They began taking names like Sobkhotep, which means Sobek is satisfied, and Sobenfer, beauty of Sobek. They were declaring to the world that their power was endorsed by this fearsome god. By merging Sobek with their state god Ra, they were performing a brilliant act of political and religious genius. They were telling the people of the Fayum, your god is our god, and he is more powerful than ever before. This is how a cult grows. It's how a god climbs the ladder. Sobek's importance exploded. Temples dedicated to him, not just as Sobek but as Sobek Ra, sprang up across Egypt. His main cult center, Shedet, was so lavishly expanded by the pharaohs that the Greeks who came 1,000 years later would call it, in awe, Crocodilopolis, the city of the crocodile. Inside these temples, the priests of Sobek Ra developed a fascinating and complex theology. They wrote hymns that celebrated him not just as a force of nature, but as the origin of all things. One text describes Sobek Ra as the one who rose from the primeval waters, combining Sobek's connection to the watery abyss of creation with Ra's role as the creator who emerges from it. He was both the mud and the lotus flower that blooms from it. He was the fierce protector of the pharaoh, the embodiment of his military might, and the guarantor of the Nile's fertility that kept the entire kingdom alive. This new, elevated status gave Sobek a front-row seat to the most epic battle in Egyptian mythology. As Ra's champion, he was now a key player in the nightly war against chaos. Every evening, as the sun god began his perilous journey through the underworld, Sobek Ra was there, a terrifying guardian on the prow of the solar bark. The underworld, the Duat, was imagined as a treacherous river, filled with demons and monsters. And who better to navigate a dark, dangerous river than the crocodile god? Who better to face the horrors of the deep than the one who embodies them? His role was to clear the way, to devour any lesser demons that dared to impede Ra's progress. He was the divine bouncer, the heavy muscle that ensured the sun could pass safely. But his most important job was to face Ra's ultimate nemesis, the archfiend of creation, a creature of pure, unmaking chaos, a serpent of unimaginable size whose only goal was to swallow the sun and end the world. His name was Apep. The battle against Apep was not a one-time event. It was a nightly struggle for the survival of the universe. Every storm, every earthquake, every solar eclipse was seen as a sign that Apep was gaining the upper hand. The fate of all existence hung in the balance every single night. And now Sobek, the primal god of the Nile, was on the front lines of this cosmic war. He wasn't just snapping at fish in the Fayum anymore. He was fighting the literal devil of the Egyptian world. This transformation is staggering. The god who began as a local deity, feared for his sudden violence and revered for his connection to fertility, had become a national hero. A solar deity, a creator god, and a cosmic defender of divine order. He had become Ra's right hand, his enforcer, his secret weapon against the forces of darkness. But how exactly does a crocodile fight a giant chaos serpent? What weapons does he bring to a battle for the soul of the world? The answer involves more than just brute force. It involves magic, divine strategy, and a side of Sobek we haven't even seen yet. A side that connects him directly to the most famous story in all of Egyptian mythology, the murder of the god Osiris. To understand Sobek's role, you first have to understand the story itself. This isn't just some dusty myth. For the ancient Egyptians, this was the central drama of the cosmos. It was their Star Wars, their Game of Thrones, their Bible all rolled into one. It explained the cycle of life and death, the legitimacy of the pharaohs, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. At the heart of it all is Osiris. Imagine a king so perfect, so beloved, that under his rule, Egypt was a paradise. He taught humanity agriculture, law, and civilization. He was the embodiment of order, stability, and life itself. His wife, the powerful goddess Isis, was a master of magic, wisdom, and devotion. Together, they were the ultimate power couple, ruling a golden age. But every golden age has its shadow, and that shadow was Set, Osiris's own brother. Set was the god of chaos, the desert, storms, and violence. He was everything Osiris was not: wild, unpredictable, and consumed by a burning jealousy. He watched his brother's perfect kingdom, listened to the praise of the people, and his resentment festered into a murderous rage. He didn't just want the throne. He wanted to obliterate everything Osiris represented. So Set hatched a plan, a betrayal so cold it would make Shakespeare blush. He threw a lavish banquet and invited all the gods. The centerpiece of the party was a magnificent chest, an ornate sarcophagus, crafted to the exact measurements of one person. Set announced that whoever fit perfectly inside the chest could keep it. One by one the gods tried, but it was too big or too small. Then it was Osiris's turn. Unsuspecting, he lay down inside. It was a perfect fit. The moment he was in, Set slammed the lid shut. His co-conspirators rushed forward, sealing it with lead and throwing the chest into the Nile. Osiris, the king of life, was trapped in a coffin, drowned in the very river that gave Egypt its existence. The Golden Age was over. Chaos had won. But Isis refused to let it end there. Her grief was a force of nature. She searched tirelessly for her husband's body, finally finding the chest washed ashore, tangled in the roots of a tree. She brought him back to Egypt, hiding his body in the reeds of the Nile Delta, planning to use her powerful magic to bring him back to life. But Set, the god of chaos, is never idle. While out hunting, he stumbled upon the hidden coffin. In a fit of pure, unadulterated fury, he tore his brother's body from the chest and did something horrific. To ensure Osiris could never be made whole again, never be resurrected, he dismembered the body into 14 pieces and scattered them across the length and breadth of Egypt. This is the absolute low point of the story. Order is not just dead. It's been annihilated, scattered to the winds. The task facing Isis now seems impossible. How could she ever find every piece of her beloved husband from a land as vast as Egypt? Yet she began her quest, transforming into a bird and flying over the land, her mournful cries echoing through the Nile Valley. She found 13 of the pieces. One by one, she recovered them, reassembling the broken body of her king. But one piece, the 14th piece, was lost forever. It had been thrown into the Nile and immediately devoured by a fish, or, in many tellings of the tale, by a crocodile. And there he is, Sobek, crashing into the most sacred story in Egyptian history in the most shocking way imaginable. He eats the phallus of the dead king. The very symbol of Osiris's fertility, his power to create life, is consumed by the beast of the river. From this perspective, Sobek seems like an agent of Set, an instrument of chaos. By eating that final piece, he makes Osiris's resurrection incomplete. He seemingly seals the victory for the forces of darkness and sterility. He becomes an accomplice after the fact to the murder of a god. This act cemented Sobek's reputation as a creature of terrifying, unpredictable violence. He wasn't just a physical threat, he was a metaphysical one. He could literally swallow the hope of the nation. It's a dark, primal image that's hard to shake. Sobek, the devourer, the final insult to a murdered king. But if you think that's the end of the story, you don't know the Egyptians. They didn't do simple answers. Because in other texts, in other traditions, the story is told in a completely different way. In some versions, particularly those found in the ancient pyramid texts, Sobek's role is flipped on its head. He isn't the villain who thwarts the resurrection. He's the hero who makes it possible. In these tellings, when Isis is searching for the scattered parts of her husband, she calls upon Sobek for help. It is Sobek, with his mastery of the Nile, who dives into the murky depths and retrieves the lost pieces of Osiris. He acts as a divine search and rescue team. He becomes the protector of the dead king, a guardian of the sacred body against the chaos of the waters. So which is it? Is he the monstrous accomplice of Set who devours the hope of resurrection? Or is he the noble ally of Isis who helps restore order to the cosmos? The answer is yes. He is both. And this contradiction is the absolute key to understanding him. Ancient Egyptian religion wasn't a single unified book. It was a fluid collection of beliefs that varied from city to city and changed over millennia. In some regions, his chaotic, dangerous nature was emphasized. In others, especially in his cult centers like the Fayum, his protective and creative aspects were paramount. The Osiris myth became a grand stage where all these different aspects of the gods could play out. Sobek's dual role in the story perfectly captures the dual nature of the Nile itself. The river could swallow you whole, its hidden currents and predatory creatures a constant danger. It was a place of death. But it was also the source of all life, the place of rebirth, where the fertile silt was deposited and new growth began. Sobek embodies this paradox. He is the danger in the water that consumes the symbol of life, and he is the power in the water that helps bring life back from the dead. He is not simply good or evil. He is a force of nature, and nature is both creative and destructive, often at the same time. His involvement shows that even the most primal, terrifying forces in the universe have a role to play in the divine order. You can't just get rid of chaos, you have to incorporate it. You have to respect it. By consuming the piece of Osiris, Sobek symbolically takes that divine fertility into himself, and by helping to retrieve the body, he gives that power back, enabling the ultimate miracle. After Isis reassembles the 13 pieces, she fashions a new phallus out of gold and clay, and using her immense magic, she conceives a son with her resurrected husband, Horus, the falcon god, the avenger. Osiris, incomplete, could not return to the land of the living. Instead, he descended to become the king of the underworld, the lord of the afterlife. But his legacy, his heir, was born, and this heir, Horus, would grow up with one single, all-consuming purpose: to avenge his father and reclaim the throne from his murderous uncle Set. This sets the stage for the greatest battle in Egyptian mythology, an epic 80-year war between Horus and Set for control of the cosmos. It's a conflict of divine titans, of magic and brute force, of order versus chaos. And right in the middle of this epic struggle, you will once again find Sobek. But whose side will he take this time? Will he align with the chaotic violence of Set, a god he so closely resembles? Or will he stand with Horus, the rightful heir, and fight to restore the order his father had created? The battle for Egypt is about to begin, and the crocodile god has a critical choice to make. The scales of divine justice are trembling. On one side, the raw, unbridled fury of a usurper king, Set, who offers a world governed by strength alone. On the other, the righteous fury of a dispossessed son, Horus, who promises a return to balance, to Ma'at, the sacred order of the cosmos. And in the middle, caught in the swirling currents of this celestial civil war, is Sobek. This is not just a choice between two gods. It is a choice for the very soul of the crocodile god himself. To side with Set would be to embrace his most primal, terrifying aspect. To become the monster in the water, the sudden death from below, the embodiment of nature's brutal indifference. It would be an alliance of pure destructive power. The storm god and the river predator, two faces of untamed chaos, united to shatter the old world and remake it in their own violent image. The appeal is undeniable. In Set, Sobek sees a reflection. He sees a god who is not ashamed of his power, who does not apologize for his ferocity. Set's world is simple. The strong rule, the weak perish. It is the law of the desert, the law of the savanna, and the law of the riverbank. For a creature like Sobek, whose entire existence is a testament to that very principle, this philosophy is not evil. It is natural. It is the truth he lives every single day. Why bow to a system of laws and inheritances when your own teeth and claws are the only law that has ever mattered? Set offers him not just a place in the new order, but a validation of his own nature. He wouldn't have to be a symbol of fertility first, a protector second, and a predator third. He could simply be the predator, the ultimate force. But then there is Horus, and in Horus Sobek sees something else. Not a reflection, but a purpose. Horus doesn't offer a world of chaos. He offers a world where strength is used to maintain order, not to shatter it. He represents the Nile at its most benevolent, predictable, life-giving, the foundation upon which civilization is built. To side with Horus is to embrace the other half of his identity, the creator god, the protector of the pharaoh, the source of the fertile silt that nourishes all of Egypt. It is a promise of elevation. He would not be merely feared. He would be revered. He would be a guardian of the divine throne, his terrifying power a shield for the rightful king, a promise that no enemy could ever threaten the stability of the two lands. The gods whisper. Alliances are forged in shadow and fire. The Great Council, the Ennead, is divided, and as the conflict escalates from backroom betrayals to open warfare, a pivotal, horrific event unfolds that will force Sobek's hand. The details are shrouded in the mists of mythology, with versions shifting like the desert sands, but the core of the story remains a shocking testament to the brutality of this war. In a moment of divine rage, Horus confronts his own mother, Isis. In some tellings, she had shown a moment of pity to the captured Set, and in his fury at this perceived betrayal, Horus, the would-be king of order, commits an act of pure chaos. He attacks his own mother, severing her hands, or in some more gruesome versions, her entire head. The cosmos itself recoils in horror. This is the ultimate violation. A son striking down his mother, the very goddess who magically conceived and raised him to fight for this throne. In that moment, Horus is no better than Set. He has allowed his rage to consume him, to tarnish his righteous cause with a crime that is almost unforgivable. Thoth, the god of wisdom, mercifully intervenes, healing Isis with his powerful magic. But the damage is done, and in the chaos, Horus's own severed hands, the very hands that would one day hold the scepter of Egypt, are lost. Cast away, they sink into the murky, impenetrable depths of the Nile. This is the moment of truth. The future of Egypt, the very instrument of its rule, lies at the bottom of Sobek's domain. Who else could possibly navigate those dark, treacherous waters? Who else has the strength, the senses, the sheer predatory instinct to find what has been lost in the abyss? Plea goes out. It is not a command, but a desperate request. Horus, the symbol of order, has lost a part of himself to the chaos. Isis, his champion, begs the great crocodile god to intervene. Find the hands of my son, she implores. Restore the future king. Here the choice is laid bare. To do nothing would be to side with Set. To allow Horus to remain wounded, incomplete, and unworthy of the throne would be a passive victory for the usurper. It would be an acceptance of chaos. But to act, to dive into the darkness and retrieve the lost hands of Horus, that is a declaration. It is an act of restoration. It is a choice for order. It is a commitment to healing the wounds of the divine family, and by extension, healing Egypt itself. And so, Sobek makes his choice. He slips into the waters of the Nile, but this time, he is not the mindless hunger, not the lurking death. He is on a sacred mission. The full power of his divine senses, honed over eons of hunting in the silt-choked blackness, is now focused on a single task. He is the ultimate search and rescue operative. He moves through the water not as a beast, but as a surgeon. He sifts through the mud and reeds, past the bones of mortal and animal alike, searching for a sign, a trace of divine essence. The pressure would crush a mortal. The darkness would blind any other god. But this is his kingdom. He is the master of the deep, and he finds them. Emerging from the surface of the Nile, the mighty jaws that could snap a bull in half now hold the severed hands of Horus with impossible gentleness. He brings them to the bank, laying them before Isis and a humbled, shamed Horus. This single act is more powerful than any oath of allegiance. Sobek has not just chosen a side. He has actively participated in the restoration of the rightful king. He has used his fearsome primal power not for destruction, but for healing. He has proven that the predator can also be the protector. From this moment on, there is no ambiguity. Sobek is a champion of Horus. He becomes one of his fiercest bodyguards, his raw power now tethered to a divine purpose. He is the muscle that backs up the claim of legitimacy. Imagine the psychological impact on Set's forces. To attack Horus now means you must first go through the unblinking, thousand-toothed maw of the Nile's greatest predator. Sobek's allegiance transforms the war. He is a living superweapon, a deterrent of immense power, now fully committed to the cause of Ma'at. But in choosing Horus, Sobek has made an eternal enemy of Set. The red god of the desert does not forgive, and he does not forget. He sees this not just as a strategic loss, but as a profound betrayal. The one god who truly understood his own violent nature, the one creature who embodied the same brutal truths of existence, has turned his back on him. He has chosen the gilded cage of civilization over the glorious freedom of chaos. The rage of Set, already a terrifying force that can whip up sandstorms and tear the sky apart, now focuses with a laser-like intensity on the crocodile god. The battle for the throne of Egypt is about to enter its most violent phase, and Sobek, the newly crowned champion of order, has just painted a massive target on his own back. The next time he meets Set, it will not be as a potential ally, but as a mortal enemy on the battlefield of the gods. The declaration was made. The battle lines, once blurred by diplomacy and ancient allegiances, were now carved into the very fabric of the cosmos, sharp and absolute. For Set, the lord of the Red Desert, this was more than a strategic setback. It was a profound personal insult. He, the embodiment of strength and chaotic might, had been spurned by a creature he viewed as his kin, a beast of raw, untamed power. He had offered Sobek a seat at the victor's table, and the crocodile had not only refused, but had thrown his lot in with the fledgling falcon, the boy king Horus. In the howling winds of the desert, Set's fury took shape, a storm of sand and vengeance aimed directly at the heart of Egypt, the Nile. The great war for the throne of the gods was not a single glorious battle. It was a grinding, brutal campaign that spanned decades, fought not only on the physical plains of Egypt, but in the hearts of mortals and the shifting landscapes of the Duat. It was a war of ideology. Set's philosophy was simple. Strength is the only law. The powerful take, the weak submit. His was the storm that scours the land clean, the earthquake that shatters mountains, the ambition that knows no bounds. He saw the order of Ma'at, the divine balance championed by his brother Osiris, as a cage, a set of rules designed by the fearful to restrain the truly great. Against this stood Horus, the rightful heir. He fought for legacy, for justice, for the continuation of his father's work. He represented the predictable flood, the rising of the sun, the sacred duty of a king to his people. His allies were the established powers, Thoth, the god of wisdom, whose strategies were as intricate as hieroglyphs, Isis, whose magic was a shield of fierce maternal love, and now Sobek, the brutal, unpredictable force of the river. Set knew that to defeat Horus, he had to break his coalition, and Sobek was the linchpin. He was Horus's muscle, his raw, physical deterrent. More than that, he was the master of the Nile, the very lifeblood of the kingdom Horus sought to rule. To control the Nile was to control Egypt. And so, Set's first major assault was not on Horus's armies, but on Sobek's domain. It began subtly. The waters near the deserts grew brackish, tainted with the salt of the barren lands. Then the desert winds, Set's loyal servants, began to blow with unnatural force, carrying not just sand, but a smothering, life-choking dust that settled on the surface of the river like a shroud. The water grew sluggish, the currents weakening as if the river itself were falling ill. From his temples at Kom Ombo and the Fayum, Sobek felt the sickness in his veins. The river was his body, and it was being poisoned. He rose from the depths, a colossal form of green-gold scales and muscle, his eyes burning with cold reptilian fury. He could taste Set's chaotic magic on the water, a bitter, grating tang of sterility and decay. He bellowed a challenge that shook the papyrus reeds, a sound that was half hiss, half thunder. The answer came in the form of a haboob, a monstrous wall of sand that rolled in from the west, turning the midday sun to a blood-red smear in the sky. This was no natural storm. It was Set's power made manifest, a tidal wave of desert seeking to bury the river, to choke it, to erase it from the land. As the sand hit the water, the Nile churned and boiled. The two elements, water and desert, life and sterility, clashed in a titanic struggle. Sobek dove deep, feeling the crushing weight of the sand pressing down. But this was his element. He was the current. He was the flood. With a surge of primal power, he commanded the river to fight back. Great whirlpools formed, sucking the sand down into the silt and mud of the riverbed. Waterspouts twisted into the sky, tearing at the heart of the sandstorm, their spray turning the dust to heavy, useless mud that rained down into the desert. Sobek himself became a living torpedo of divine rage, his immense tail churning the water into a weapon. His jaws, which could snap the spine of a hippo, tore at the magical constructs within the storm. For a day and a night the battle raged. The edge of the fertile black land became a war zone of mud and howling wind. In the end the river held, bruised, choked with silt but alive. The storm broke and the desert retreated, leaving behind a scarred but defiant Nile. Sobek had won the first battle. He had proven that his domain would not fall easily, but it was a costly victory, and it had served another purpose. It was a diversion. While Sobek was defending the river's physical form, Set had struck directly at Horus. In a brutal confrontation, the two gods met in a fury of claws and divine weapons. Set, using his superior strength and ruthless cunning, overwhelmed his nephew. He pinned the falcon god down and, in an act of unthinkable cruelty, he reached down and tore out Horus's left eye. The eye, a celestial body representing the moon, was a vessel of immense magical power. Its loss left Horus crippled, half-blind and spiritually wounded. The forces of order were thrown into disarray. Set did not destroy the eye. He wanted to savor his victory. He broke it into 6 pieces and with a triumphant roar, scattered them across Egypt, casting the final largest piece into the dark, murky waters of the Nile. A trophy, lost in his new enemy's own kingdom. News of Horus's mutilation reached Sobek as he patrolled his now settling waters. The rage he felt was cold and deep. He had been tricked. While he fought a storm of sand, the true storm had broken over his ally. Guilt mixed with his fury. He had been so focused on defending his own territory that he had left his king vulnerable. Set had not only wounded Horus, he had shamed Sobek, proving that the crocodile's power could be misdirected, his attention diverted. But with shame came resolve. The eye was in his domain. Its recovery was now his sacred duty. This was not a task for Thoth's careful calculations or Isis's protective spells. This was a job for a predator, a hunter who knew the dark places of the world. He submerged himself, leaving the world of air and light behind, and began the search. The Nile was not just water and silt. It was a repository of secrets, a graveyard of forgotten things. To find a fragment of a god in its depths was like searching for a single specific grain of sand in a desert. But the eye of Horus was not inert. It bled power, a faint lunar luminescence that pulsed in the darkness. Sobek's senses, honed over eons of hunting in muddy water, were uniquely suited to the task. He was not looking, he was feeling. He followed the subtle shifts in the river's magical currents, the faint hum of celestial energy that was alien to his chthonic realm. He hunted for days, his powerful tail propelling him through sunken temples and ancient reeds. Creatures of chaos, drawn by the eye's power and Set's lingering influence, swarmed from the depths. Grotesque fish with too many teeth, serpents of living mud, and water spirits twisted by chaotic magic all sought to claim the prize for their dark master. Sobek met them with the silent, explosive violence of the crocodile. He was the apex predator here. He tore through them not with anger, but with a cold, terrifying efficiency. They were obstacles, nothing more. Finally, in a deep, silent pool near the first cataract, he found it, the largest piece of the lunar eye, resting on the riverbed, pulsing with a soft silver light that cut through the gloom. It was beautiful, perfect, and broken. As Sobek approached, the light flared, and he felt a wave of pure, undiluted order, of cosmic balance and divine sight. It was an energy so different from his own primal chaos, yet he felt an undeniable connection to it. In that moment, he understood his purpose in this war more clearly than ever before. He was the monster who fought for the light. He was the savage beast who served the perfect king. Gently, with a reverence that seemed contrary to his nature, he took the fragment of the eye into his great jaws. He did not bite down. He held it, a glowing jewel in a cavern of teeth. The power of it coursed through him, not changing him but sharpening him, focusing his rage into a fine, deadly point. He turned and began the long swim back to the surface, the light of the moon held safely in the jaws of the crocodile. He had failed to prevent the injury, but he would be the one to begin the healing. He had retrieved hope from the bottom of the river, and now he was bringing it back to a world teetering on the edge of darkness. Set had meant to mock him by throwing the eye into his realm, but he had made a critical error. He had forgotten that in the water, nothing is truly lost to the crocodile. He rose from the murky depths, a living mountain of scale and muscle, breaking the surface of the Nile without a sound. The waters of his domain cascaded from his back, not as a sign of cleansing, but as a declaration that he was bringing his world into theirs. In his powerful jaws, held with impossible gentleness, were the pieces of what was once the Eye of Horus. It wasn't whole. It wasn't perfect. Set, in his rage, had not just plucked it out. He had torn it to shreds, casting the 6 pieces into the river like common stones. But Sobek, the master of all that the water touches, had gathered every last one. He had hunted them down in the silt and the reeds, guided by an instinct older than the pyramids. He moved with a purpose that silenced the birds and stilled the crocodiles along the banks. This wasn't the lumbering beast of the swamps. This was a king returning from a campaign, a general delivering the key to victory. He approached the assembled gods, the divine court that had been paralyzed by Horus's mutilation. A gasp went through the pantheon. There, standing before them, was the embodiment of their most primal fears, the creature of sudden, brutal death. Yet he wasn't there to threaten or devour. He was there to restore. With a deep rumble that vibrated in their very bones, he opened his jaws and carefully laid the 6 broken pieces of the divine eye onto a lotus leaf held by Isis. Her tears, which had flowed so freely for her husband and son, now fell for a different reason. A flicker of hope delivered by the most unlikely of saviors. Set stared, his face a mask of pure disbelief and incandescent fury. He had thrown the eye into the one place he believed it would be lost forever, a realm of chaos and consumption. He had given it to the great devourer, and the devourer was giving it back. But what good is an eye that is broken? What power does a shattered lens hold? It was a symbolic victory, yes, but Horus was still blind, still crippled. The war was not won. This is where the story pivots. Sobek's role was not to be the craftsman or the healer. He was the retriever, the agent of recovery. He had done what no other god could do. He had gone down into the primordial darkness and brought back the light, however fractured it might be. Now it was time for the divine specialist to take over. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, magic, and science, stepped forward. His mind, the repository of all knowledge, saw not 6 broken fragments, but a divine equation waiting to be solved. Each piece, the ancients believed, corresponded to a different sense. One part was smell, another hearing, another taste, thought, touch, and sight. Together, they formed the complete perception of reality. To heal the eye was to literally put reality back together. Thoth, using his legendary magic, a force less like pulling rabbits from a hat and more like rewriting the source code of the universe, began the delicate process. He used his divine saliva, a substance of pure creation, to bind the pieces. But it needed more. It needed a power that was both fierce and nurturing. And so Hathor was called, the goddess of love and motherhood, who sometimes took the form of a wild cow. She provided her own divine milk, a substance of pure life, to anoint the fragments and coax them back into a unified whole. As Thoth chanted the ancient words of power and Hathor applied the elixir of life, The pieces began to knit themselves together. Light flared from the seams, a brilliant, pure energy that forced even the gods to shield their eyes. When the glow subsided, the thing that lay on the lotus leaf was no longer broken. It was more than it was before. It was the Wadjet, the whole one. It was perfect. The lines where it had been broken were now part of its divine design, a testament to its journey through darkness and its restoration to light. This symbol, the Eye of Horus, would become one of the most powerful amulets in all of Egyptian history. A ward against evil, a symbol of healing, protection, and royal power. And it owed its existence, its very wholeness, to the brutal crocodile god who had rescued it from the mud. Sobek had changed the course of the war. His act of retrieval and delivery was the linchpin. Without him, Thoth would have had nothing to heal. Horus would have remained broken. Set would have solidified his illegitimate rule. By this one act, Sobek demonstrated his true allegiance. He wasn't an agent of chaos, as Set had mistakenly believed. He was an agent of Ma'at, of divine order. But his version of order was not gentle or clean. It was primal, violent, and absolute. It was the order of the food chain, the order of the river that both gives life and snatches it away without warning. He served order by being the monster that other monsters feared. For his service, Sobek's status was elevated forever. He was no longer just a feared local deity of the Fayum. He was now intrinsically linked to the Osirian myth, the central story of the entire Egyptian religion. He became known as the one who rescued the weak, and who protected the attacked. He was granted a place of honor among the gods, seen as a fierce protector of the pharaoh, who was the living embodiment of Horus. In some temples, priests would even keep and mummify crocodiles, believing them to be living incarnations of the god, treating them with a reverence that bordered on terror. They understood the bargain. Appease the great crocodile, and his terrifying power would be on your side. This transformation reveals the core of the Egyptian worldview. They didn't see gods as simply good or evil in the way we might today. They saw them as fundamental forces of nature. And nature is never simple. A storm can destroy your crops, but it also brings the rain you need to live. The sun can scorch the earth, but without it, there is only darkness and death. Sobek was the same. He was the terrifying jaws that could snap a man in half, but he was also the guardian who could retrieve the very eye of a god from the abyss. He represented the idea that sometimes to restore what is right, you need to unleash a power that is in itself terrifying. You need a monster to fight a monster. And now the stage was set for the final act of this divine drama. Horus, his sight restored, was no longer a wounded child. The Wadjet pulsed with power, granting him vision beyond that of any mortal or god. He could see Set's weaknesses, his deceptions, his every move before he made it. The balance of power had not just been restored, it had been tipped decisively. The final confrontation was inevitable. The fate of Egypt, the very concept of kingship and the order of the cosmos, would be decided in a battle between two gods, uncle and nephew, chaos and order. And as the two prepared for a war that would shake the heavens and the earth, the silent, watchful eyes of the crocodile god observed from the waters. He had played his part. He had delivered the weapon. Now, he would wait to see if the young falcon was worthy of the power he had returned to him. The world held its breath, for the greatest storm was about to break. The sky did not darken. It shattered. What had been a tense, silent twilight over the land of Egypt was ripped asunder by a shriek that was not of this world. It was the cry of a falcon, but amplified by divine rage, a sound that tore at the very fabric of creation. From the heavens Horus descended, not as a boy seeking vengeance, but as a living meteor of golden light. In his restored socket, the eye of Horus blazed, not with the gentle light of the moon, but with the searing, unforgiving fury of the midday sun. It was the symbol of Ma'at, of order, of divine right, and it was now a weapon aimed at the heart of chaos. Set, from his usurped throne in the heart of the kingdom, felt the challenge not as a sound, but as a seismic shock. He laughed. It was a grating, terrible sound like rocks grinding together in an earthquake. The impudent child had returned. He had licked his wounds and come back for more. Set rose, his form swelling, his red eyes glowing with contempt and raw, untamed power. He was the storm. He was the barren desert. He was the strength that broke the world, and he would break this little prince once and for all. Their first clash sent a shockwave that flattened acacia trees for miles and caused the waters of the Nile to recoil, pulling back from the banks as if in fear. It was not a battle of swords and shields, it was a war of concepts. Horus struck with the precision of a king, his movements embodying the sacred geometry of the cosmos. Every blow was a declaration of order. Every parry was a defense of civilization itself. The light from his eye burned away the shadows that clung to Set, forcing the god of chaos into the harsh, revealing light of truth. But Set did not fight with precision. He fought with entropy. He became a whirlwind of sand and fury, his blows landing like thunderclaps, unpredictable and devastating. He was stronger. He had always been stronger in the way a landslide is stronger than a fortress. The fortress can stand for 1,000 years, but the landslide needs only a moment of weakness to bring it all to ruin. Set clawed and bit, he roared and smashed, his every action an attempt to drag the divine struggle down into the muck of a back-alley brawl. He taunted Horus, his voice a venomous hiss, reminding him of his father's dismemberment, of his mother's tears, of his own long years hiding in the reeds like a frightened animal. From the depths of the roiling Nile, Sobek watched. The water's surface mirrored the violence in the sky, a churning canvas of reflected light and shadow. He felt the battle in his very being. Each blow from Set was the chaotic, destructive flood that wiped away villages. Each strike from Horus was the controlled, life-giving inundation that fertilized the soil. This was his own duality, his own internal conflict played out on a cosmic scale for the fate of the world. He was the impartial observer, but he was not without a stake. A world ruled by Set would be a world of endless, meaningless violence. The river would become a torrent of blood, its banks a wasteland. A world ruled by Horus promised balance, promised a cycle, a time for ferocity and a time for peace, a time for the hunt and a time for the sunning on the banks. Sobek did not root for the falcon. He rooted for the balance the falcon represented. The battle raged for days, turning the fertile lands of Egypt into a scarred battleground. Set transformed, his body twisting into monstrous parodies of nature. He became a great red hippopotamus, a beast of immense destructive power, and tried to swamp Horus's celestial boat. But Horus, guided by the perfect clarity of his restored eye, was his equal. He became a hunter with a harpoon of divine light, driving the beast back. Set became a serpent of impossible size, seeking to poison the world. But Horus, as the great falcon, soared above, his talons ready to strike. Set was growing desperate. This was not the weak, one-eyed child he had defeated before. This was something else. This was a king. In a move of pure spite, Set unleashed his ultimate power. He summoned a storm not of sand, but of darkness itself. A wave of absolute chaos that smothered light and reason. He lunged through the unnatural gloom. And this time his attack found its mark. He did not aim for the body. He aimed for the symbol. He lunged for the eye of Horus itself, seeking to pluck it out once more, to plunge the world and his nephew back into imbalance. But as his claws reached for Horus's face, a force from below answered. The Nile itself, the domain of Sobek, erupted. It was not a gentle wave. It was a pillar of water, dense and powerful, shaped like the gaping maw of a colossal crocodile. It slammed into Set, not with enough force to injure a god, but with enough to throw him off balance, to break his concentration for a single critical heartbeat. It was the river itself, declaring its allegiance. Chose order. Chose the king. In that instant of intervention, Horus saw his chance. He did not strike with anger. He did not strike with vengeance. He struck with judgment. He channeled the full, concentrated power of Ra through the eye, and it was no longer a beam of light. It was the physical manifestation of divine law. The beam struck Set not on his body, but on his very essence, the source of his brutal, virile strength. It was a searing, purifying fire that did not burn but judged. Set screamed. It was a sound of pure agony, of a fundamental part of his being shorn away. He fell to the earth, his monstrous form shrinking, the red rage in his eyes dimming to a flicker of pained disbelief. He was not dead. A force like Set could never be truly destroyed, for chaos is a necessary part of the universe. But he was diminished. He was contained. The storm had been caged. The landslide had been halted. Horus stood over him, not with triumph, but with the heavy weariness of a ruler who has done what was necessary. The sky began to clear. The unnatural darkness receded. The waters of the Nile grew calm, the reflection on their surface now showing a single victorious falcon against a clear blue sky. Beneath the placid surface, a pair of ancient reptilian eyes blinked slowly. The verdict had been rendered. The worthy had proven his worth. The balance was restored. Sobek had seen enough. With a silent, powerful swish of his tail, he sank back down into the cool, comfortable darkness of his domain. The world above had its king. The world below had its guardian. The great battle was over, but the age of gods and men was just beginning, and the untamed power of the Nile would still have a critical role to play in the destiny of Egypt. The question was no longer who would rule the throne, but how the victor would rule a world that now knew the true, terrifying depths of chaos. And as the dust of civil war settled, a new Egypt, scarred and weary, looked to its gods not just for comfort, but for a reflection of its own fractured soul. The victor, Octavian, soon to be the Emperor Augustus, would bring the iron fist of Roman order. But order, as the Egyptians knew better than anyone, is a dam built against a relentless river. The crocodile god, the embodiment of that river's untamed might, was far from finished. In fact, under the rule of the Ptolemies and then the Romans, Sobek entered one of his most fascinating and final phases. The new rulers, clever politicians that they were, understood that you don't conquer Egypt by erasing its gods. You conquer it by embracing them. They saw in Sobek a power they recognized. The Greeks equated his solar aspect with their own sun god, Helios. In the temples, a new syncretic deity emerged. Sobek Helios, a fusion of primal Egyptian force and radiant Greek order. It was a brilliant compromise. The crocodile who lurked in the depths was now also the sun that commanded the sky. This wasn't a dilution of Sobek's power. It was an expansion. He became a universal god, a protector of the empire, his ferocity now harnessed not just for the pharaoh, but for the emperor in Rome. The cult centers, especially in the Fayum, thrived. The sacred crocodiles were still bred, mummified, and offered with a devotion that spanned cultures and languages. For a few centuries, it seemed Sobek had done the impossible. He had survived the death of the civilization that birthed him. He had adapted, evolved, and found a new apex to command. But the river of time flows in only one direction. A new faith was rising from the deserts of Judea. A faith with a single jealous God who had no patience for rivals, especially not those who took the form of beasts. As Christianity spread across the Roman Empire, it offered a different kind of salvation. It promised a release from the chaotic, cyclical world that Sobek represented. It preached a gospel of good versus evil, light versus darkness, with no room for the murky, terrifying ambiguity of a God who was both creator and destroyer. The change was not instantaneous. It was a slow, grinding erosion. The temple priests grew old and were not replaced. The offerings dwindled. The pilgrims stopped coming. The sacred crocodiles, once living embodiments of a god, were now just dangerous animals. The chants and hymns that had echoed for 3,000 years fell silent, replaced by the prayers of Coptic monks. The temples of Sobek, once gleaming centers of power, were abandoned to the wind and the sand. Some were dismantled, their stones used to build churches and fortresses. Others were simply forgotten, their grand columns and terrifying relief slowly swallowed by the desert. Sobek, the lord of the waters, the primal power, the terror of the Nile, went to sleep. For over 1,000 years, his name was little more than a whisper, a strange hieroglyph in a language no one could read. He was buried, not in a tomb but under the weight of a new world. And then, in the 19th century, the world came back. Archaeologists and explorers, armed with shovels and an insatiable curiosity, began to peel back the layers of sand. They were looking for gold, for pharaohs, for the secrets of the pyramids, but in places like the Fayum Oasis and at the great temple of Kom Ombo, they found something else. Something stranger. They found crocodiles. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. Mummified crocodiles, from tiny hatchlings wrapped like cigars to colossal 15-foot behemoths, their skin still leathery, their teeth still sharp after millennia in the dark. Imagine their astonishment. They unearthed vast cemeteries dedicated entirely to these sacred reptiles. They found crocodile eggs carefully mummified. They found crocodile fetuses preserved in jars. They found entire nurseries, a production line of divinity, where these creatures were raised, ritually slaughtered, and prepared for the afterlife. This wasn't just worship, it was an industry. It was a testament to a faith so profound, so deeply ingrained, that it marshaled immense resources to honor its terrifying god. These discoveries were a shock. They revealed a side of ancient Egypt that wasn't all golden masks and serene pharaohs. This was a faith born from the mud and the blood of the riverbank. It was visceral, primal, and utterly real. The rediscovery of Sobek was the rediscovery of Egypt's untamed heart. He was the key to understanding the fundamental duality of their worldview. Why worship a creature that could tear you to pieces? Because in its power, you saw the power of creation itself. In its violence, you saw the necessary violence of survival. In its sudden appearance from the murky depths, you saw the unpredictable nature of life, death, and rebirth. Sobek wasn't a god you prayed to for gentle comfort. He was a god you made a pact with, an alliance of mutual respect with the raw, chaotic forces of the universe. You honored the crocodile so that the river would bring fertile silt and not a devastating flood. You revered his ferocity so that it might be turned against your enemies, not your children. But has he truly been gone all this time? Or did we just stop calling him by his name? Look at our world today. We've built cities of steel and glass. We've mapped the genome and walked on the moon. We believe we have tamed the chaos, that we are the masters of our domain. But the crocodile is still in the water. We may not call him Sobek, but we know his power. We feel it in the brutal, unpredictable swings of the stock market, the animal spirits that can create or destroy fortunes in an instant. We see it in the terrifying, indiscriminate power of a hurricane, a wildfire, or a plague. Nature reminding us that it is and always will be in charge. We see Sobek in our own psychology, in the dark, reptilian parts of our brain that we try to suppress. The sudden flash of rage, the primal urge to dominate, the cold, calculating instinct for survival at any cost. We try to cage this inner crocodile with laws and ethics and reason, but we know it's always there, lurking just beneath the surface of our consciousness. But his legacy is not just one of darkness. Sobek was also a god of creation, of unexpected fertility. His chaos was the primordial soup from which new life emerged. And we see that too. We see it in the disruptive innovator who shatters an entire industry to build something new. We see it in the artist who channels their inner turmoil into a masterpiece. We see it in the sudden breakthrough, the flash of inspiration that comes not from quiet contemplation, but from the messy, chaotic collision of ideas. This is the creative power of Sobek, the life that erupts from the churning waters. For 3,000 years, the Egyptians looked at the Nile and saw a perfect metaphor for existence. It was a source of life, a giver of food, a highway for commerce. But it was also a place of hidden dangers, of sudden death, lorded over by a creature that was a living fossil, a perfect killing machine that had remained unchanged for millions of years. They didn't try to ignore the monster in the river. They didn't pretend it wasn't there. They built a temple to it. They gave it a name. They honored its power, because they understood that the power to create and the power to destroy are two sides of the same coin. The ultimate lesson of Sobek is a timeless one. It is a warning against arrogance, a reminder that no matter how high we build our walls, no matter how sophisticated our technology becomes, we are still part of a natural world that is fundamentally wild, chaotic, and beyond our complete control. We can never truly conquer the river. We can never truly kill the crocodile. The best we can do is what the ancient Egyptians did: learn to respect it, to understand its rhythms, and to navigate its treacherous waters with wisdom and courage. Sobek's story is the story of humanity's eternal struggle to find order in chaos, to find meaning in violence, and to find hope in the face of overwhelming primal fear. His temples may lie in ruin, his name may be forgotten by most, but his spirit, the spirit of the crocodile god, endures. It lives on in every untamed river, in every sudden storm, and in the wild, unpredictable depths of the human heart.